West Asphalt. Jim?
Yes, through your worship. As part of Highland Village's subdivision construction, they have to do a road widening to accommodate a turning lane for entering the subdivision. This will require a portion of Main Street to be reconstructed and then repaved in the disturbed areas to where the force main was run from the development over to Adeline Avenue. And that was in the eastbound lane or the south side of Main Street. Now there is a portion of Main Street that the developer isn't affecting with their works, and it is getting into be a pretty poor state and quickly deteriorating. We've noticed in the last few months some fairly substantial potholes that we have to keep dealing with there, and it's just starting to break up. So we had planned on including this in our normal paving for this summer, just because it wasn't part of the Connecting Link funding that we did receive. That was only for the section of Main Street East to Owen Sound. And we have been approached. We were going to do that through our OCIF funding. We were approached by Tribute Homes, and they were seeing if we were interested in including this as in part of their project and just covering the whole thing all at once. That way there's no joints, no coming in later to tear things back up again, where we could have some potential down the road for separations, frost, freeze thaw cycles, and not opening up. So they have asked us that they come up with a price or a costing there to do this section of Main Street on the west side from John Street up to Adeline. And they've come up with a costing around $15,000 to a maximum of $17,000. They're very confident in their numbers there. The work would be completed by their contractor. So that frees up town staff that we don't have to include it in our RFP or tender, which is going out very soon. But they're looking at paving in the next couple of weeks. So this way we could get it over and done with all in one section and have, instead of leaving a section there that's old, be all rehabbed all at the same time and all matching. So this will allow us with the rest of our funding that we have through OCIF and Connecting Link, just makes it much easier for reporting at the end of the projects when we have to report back on what we've done and what sections, who the contractor was, that sort of thing. So we would be responsible to repay the $17,000, and that is inclusive of our non-recoverable portion of HST. I did meet with Highland staff this morning. They're very confident in those numbers, and they said actually if they do go over that, or there is something wrong with their figures, then it'll be a donation from Tribute Homes, and they'll cover the rest of it. So this could be funded from our general capital reserves. This account currently has just over 1.3 million in it. And during our consultations, of course, we had Tribute Homes, SBA and Associates look at our costings there as well last week. This does align with a number of council's strategic priorities. One, to invest in funding and critical infrastructure for the future, promote more open communication, and promote partnerships and collaborations.
Okay, sounds like a good deal. Any comments or questions for Jim? No? Okay. All right, so we have a motion that reads, be it resolved, the council receives report DO 2020-01 Main Street West Asphalt for information, and the council approves up to $17,000 from the general capital reserve to be used to fund the additional paving work on Main Street West between John Street and Adeline Street. Mover and seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Fegan. Any discussion on that? All in favor? Carried. Excellent. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Next, we have a report from the treasurer regarding the June 30th financial update.
Thank you. And through the mayor, can you hear me okay? So not unlike the first quarter of 2020, the second quarter has proven to be just as unprecedented, including the financial impacts that I've outlined in this report. The majority of the report mirrors what was conveyed in the March report, so I will just quickly highlight the changes that have occurred since then. Town staff have recently reached out to the CDRC, the library, and the fire department to make sure that they are managing okay. The report back from them indicates that they are managing fine financially to date, as their reduced revenues have also been offset by their reduced expenses due to reduced programming and staffing. Since the last report, we have entered stages 1 and 2 of the province's reopening. And as just announced today, we will be entering stage 3. So as far as staffing changes that have happened since March, we had reported that no seasonal summer staff had been hired. Since then, we have started 2 employees back to work to keep up with the grass cutting and the park cleaning. And that started late May, early June. They're working Saturdays and Sundays as to help offset the rest of the week for the social distancing for staff members and keeping 1 personnel member in a truck at a time. The bylaw officer, we had reported we were hoping would start the middle of June. We are starting interviews next week, and we are now looking at late July, early August hire for bylaw. The grant applications at the last report, we had mentioned the Green Stream funding for Well 3. We have, as you know, since learned that that was denied. We have, however, learned that we were successful in getting a portion of the Connecting Link grant for Main Street. And we have applied to the FCM for the Citywide Works software, and we are awaiting whether or not we are successful for that grant. With respect to revenues, as mentioned earlier, they continue to decline. The most prominent areas would be our bank interest, field rentals, the Grace Tippling Hall rentals, and tax relief for write-offs for property taxes and water penalties. We are still issuing burial permits and marriage licenses. With respect to expenses from the last report, the tender for the Main Street and Simon Water Main repair closed on Friday, July the 9th, and we had 2 submissions. We are currently reviewing those, and that project will be awarded shortly. The projects for the OCIF funding, which include the resurfacing of several different roads within the town, that project was submitted Friday, July 10th. So we will find out shortly if our submission has been approved. We already know what our approved amount is. We just have to make sure that our projects are approved. And as Steve Weaver mentioned earlier too in his report, changes continue to happen with the Development Charges Act, and staff are trying to keep up with those changes. And we are continuing to work with the consultants on the soft services for parks, recreation, and library. As far as projects that were on hold or deferred, we had previously mentioned that the Fiddle Park Master Plan would likely start in July 2020. I believe we will most likely end up putting that off to 2021. And although not official yet, we are anticipating that the EDC committee will likely have to reschedule their September 10th EDC breakfast to 2021. And just in case anyone was wondering, our 4th flag pole has been delivered. We are just waiting to have it installed. And so expenses that have incurred as a direct result of COVID-19, on page 6 of the report, you will find an updated listing. To the end of March, our costs were just over 29,000. But to date, to the end of June, we are looking at just over 66,000 with more costs pending. As we discuss alternate council meeting arrangements, we will have to pay for extra space for that. I'm still coding invoices that relate to PPE equipment and hand sanitizer and extra cleaning. Again, we are fortunate that, in this case at least, that we do not have public transit or municipal recreation programs. And for that reason, the majority of the deficits that neighboring municipalities are encountering are not things that we are encountering. I've attached phase 3 of the COVID-19 relief plan as Appendix 6. So many taxpayers have taken advantage of the option to defer their tax payment and their utility payments without being penalized. Phase 3 of COVID relief will take a more direct approach that will assist those members of the community that, regardless of the staged reopenings that are taking place in the province, still find themselves enduring some type of financial hardship. Staff will work individually with such property owners that remain unable to pay, while at the same time encouraging those that can pay to do so. Currently, our property tax arrears are 10% above what they were this time last year, and our water and sewer arrears are 33% above what they were. This is also partly due to the fact that we have not been transferring water arrears to the tax account, and neither have we been issuing any disconnect notices to date. Appendix 7 that was just recently went out as an information insert with the water and sewer bill indicates how payments can continue to be made for the public even while the town hall remains closed. Also included in this report is the 2021 budget schedule, which has been brought forward now in order to highlight the 2-week time difference due to December only having one council meeting scheduled. But this timeline is just a placeholder for staff, and it allows for scheduled meetings to be arranged. And not unlike an election year where the budget timeline is abnormal, there's no reason why this budget has to be passed in December. If it did get passed into January, should we run into time delays due to management of COVID-related situations, that's perfectly fine too. So the budget timeline is not written in stone. We can amend it. We already know that there will be no assessment increase for 2021 due to the planned provincial property reassessment being put off till 2022. So the 2021 budget will be challenging because there will be little to no budgeting room as far as assessment goes. And that's it. I'm done unless anybody has any questions.
Councilor Donato?
On your budgeting scheduling boards, when are you looking for the boards to start submitting their draft budgets? Just from.
So I've asked that the collection of data and estimates by department heads and boards be presented to Treasury no later than August 31st.
So you're looking for the boards to present their draft budgets in August. Okay.
And it's not unusual, Walter, for us to not have the board's budgets when we do present the draft budget to council. And generally what I do is just inflate it by 2 to 3%. And then we find out what it is at a later time. Sometimes the boards don't have their budgets passed till the new year, but we can't hold up our process because of that.
No, it's just like in our case at the fire board, haven't got a chief in place to do a budget at this point in time. So August 31st, but anyway, I'll work with what we got and see if we can get you one by then.
I would just inflate the 2020 budget for that, in that case.
Yeah, basically for the draft budget, Carrie, I mean, you just need a number more or less as a placeholder for now, right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, I realize that, but if we can get something, you know, a little bit more defined, it's a lot easier even for us at the town.
It does make it easier for us. Knowing what our assessment's going to be means that, you know, there's not going to be a lot of wiggle room. So even to add 2% across the board, it's not feasible. So there will have to be cuts in some areas in order to manage increases in other areas. And the COVID-19 costs are going to continue into 2021. I don't think there's a budget line that has been untouched in some way by this pandemic.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for Carrie? So just to be clear, the phase 3 of the financial relief plan, it's not sort of a one size fits all plan anymore. So, you know, there's some onus that's being put back on ratepayers, you know, who have the demonstrated need to kind of opt into it. So hopefully that will, you know, reduce some of the you know, fiscal burden that plan has had on our books so far. But you know, I think at this point that is the wisest strategy. I mean, it's more targeted, you know, directly to those ratepayers who actually need the assistance, as opposed to just applying a similar standard across the board, you know, to everybody. You know, some people are back to work and, you know, are really in you know, a position where they're not, you know, having financial difficulties. So they, you know, in by all rights should be making the payments. So, okay, if there's nothing else, then look for mover and seconder. Be it resolved, the council receives report FS 2020-08 with respect to the June 30th, 2020 financial update, and the council approves the 2021 budget schedule as presented in Appendix 5, and the council approves phase 3 of the COVID-19 financial relief plan, being a financial relief application specifically for additional assistance as presented in Appendix 6. The mover and seconder for that, moved by Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Hall. Any additional discussion on that? All in favor? It's carried. Okay, item 5, which is the CAO's report regarding police services options and general review. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we will defer this report to a special meeting of council, which will be held this coming Wednesday, July the 15th at 8:30. In addition to the CAO's report that's included in the agenda tonight, there have been a couple of pieces of correspondence, some from a ratepayer within the community proposing a lease option. So we'll include that correspondence on the agenda for Wednesday night. And there's also some correspondence from the Shelburne Police Association indicating that they have completed a survey of their members regarding certain aspects of the costing process, and the association plans to provide the results of that survey for council's information, and we'll look at that on Wednesday as well. So moving on to item number 6. That is the CAO's report regarding the COVID-19 reopening of Town Hall, update number 2. Denise?
Through the mayor, thank you. So obviously this report was written before the changes of today is announced. With that said, as a business that hadn't been open, many are opening. The services that the town has provided have been continual since our original close to the public in March. Everything is being delivered electronically or by appointment only. So we believe that the scope of services that Town Hall in particular delivers have been ongoing. We had outlined, and I apologize, that is one of the cats. If you hear that, I'm so sorry. Arthur, can you get Marmalade? So we had looked at staff when we would actually be back in the office based on a number of scenarios. This report summarizes that, again, taking a very precautionary approach, we're recommending that we look at our staff returning to the office as the entire team on August the 31st, and that we would open to the public the week later. However, instead of 5 days a week, we've looked at 3 days a week from 9 to 4. What we are recognizing is a very small staff team, both operationally and administratively, because we did have to face this issue, unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago, that if one member of staff, unfortunately, has a potential exposure to COVID-19, whether it's due to a family member, the impact of that is significant, where we could have 4 or 5 staff removed from our staffing resource team because they will need to be tested and then be in self-isolation or quarantine until those test results come back. So if our services were not continuing, I'd be hesitant to push this off. We've also done significant assessment of our colleague municipalities, and none are actually gearing up to be reopened until September. So that was sort of a date that we actually corresponded with. So at this time, what we're recommending is that we reopen to the public on Tuesday, September the 8th, 3 days a week, and that staff would return to the office on August the 31st. In follow-up to the questions from council earlier in the meeting regarding when in-person meetings would return, there's 2 issues that is reliant upon. One is when the CDRC reopens, and the second is when we can actually comfortably hold a meeting. So probably the most realistic date to look at and return to in-person council meetings, I would say would be September the 14th, and August the 24th, I think, would be too early, but we certainly can try to work towards the reinstatement of council meetings at the CDRC in the Town and Country Room starting on September the 14th. That's basically it for the report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for the CAO? Okay. The mover and seconder, be it resolved that council receives report CAO 2020-08 regarding COVID-19 reopening town hall update 2, and that the tentative date for the reopening of town hall on Tuesday, September 8th, 2020 for public access be received for information. Mover and seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Wegner. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. All right, so we have a series of notices of motion that were presented at the last meeting. The first one was moved by Councillor Bernardo. Be it resolved that council directs staff to bring back a report on what is required to bring the lands on the west end of town from Highway 89 to the 4th line into the town's built boundary. And furthermore, what upfront costs the developer can front end any requirements to bring those said lands to a developmental stage. And furthermore, that the report from staff come back to council no later than the July 20th meeting. Councillor Bernardo, you're on mute. Sorry.
After hearing what we've heard tonight, I think that motion is kind of premature, and I'd like to withdraw it because we're looking at a 2-year time frame before anything can really be done. So I think that maybe a 1.5 years down the road or something like that, that might be a more appropriate time to relook at something of that nature if we need to. That's just my feelings on it.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, it's your notice of motion. Councillor Buffett, did you want to, anything?
Yeah, what I wanted to say was maybe the wording could be changed around a bit, and I'm not quite sure how to put that into words, but I think between now and the time that all this work is being done, I'd like to be able to see that we have some direction to staff to make sure that they accommodate the meetings, because I'm under the impression that it's been hard for them to have any meetings. So if we could at least be on top of that and find some way just to report back to us what's happening. And then as far as any agreement, the report from Steve Weaver talked about early payment and putting together an agreement. So maybe that should be part of a report that we would get back so that we can take some early steps to do that.
Okay. And yeah, and I think more or less that's what we heard from Steve Weaver tonight, that
Right.
those conversations will be ongoing. And it was pretty clear that a lot of that stuff can happen up front, so that, when we do reach the point where an application can be accepted, hopefully that process will move a lot quicker than might otherwise have been the case if we hadn't have had the opportunity to have those discussions. So personally, I don't think we need a formal motion for that necessarily. We had a good discussion earlier, and I think, I think everybody's intentions were clear there. So Councilor Bernardo, you're withdrawing that notice of motion then? Okay, so then the second notice of motion from the last meeting, also by Councilor Bernardo, reads as follows: be it resolved that staff bring back to council any staffing requirements needed to carry out town reporting and duties to council by the July 6th meeting. And be it resolved that staff investigate and report to council what grants and costs would be involved to create a permanent position for the town public relations position, for a town public relations position. And furthermore, that this report come to the first meeting in August.
So I'd like to amend the staffing part of that to the same time frame in August, if possible, on my motion, because I think July 6th meeting is come and gone. Time frame is come and gone. But if I can speak to the motion, the point of that motion is that I keep hearing that staff is small, working hard, and almost unable to complete certain things that we've asked of them because they're so busy. And we started out somewhere way back asking the CAO to give us a report of whatever staffing requirements was needed to get things done at Town Hall. And we've never had that report come to us, and we've been waiting for it. And I just feel that staff is small and overworked and having a hard time bringing forward certain reports. So I'm asking, what do you need to do what needs to be done for council? And that's part of the first part of that motion.
Okay, so you're just wanting to amend that first section, which requested a report back by July 6th.
To the first meeting in August, or in August, yeah.
Just a suggestion. I mean, you're the mover, but because budget discussions are going to be starting in August, should it be made as part of the budget framework discussion?
That's not a problem, because that is coming up in August as well. Yeah, you're right.
Okay. Okay, so what if it reads, be it resolved that staff bring back to council any staffing requirements needed to carry out town reporting and duties to council as part of the 2021 budget discussions?
Sounds fair.
Jennifer, did you sort of get that?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. All right, so we'll need a seconder on that motion. And on the floor, seconded by Councillor Buffett. Okay, any additional discussion on that? Denise, did you want to speak to it at all? Or?
Through your worship, yes. A lot of the staffing needs were going to be fully assessed with our own SDR, and just due to the COVID-19 and other issues, we have actually addressed some of our staffing impacts. We looked at the resources with respect to planning to take some of the workload off of our clerk and our director of legislative services. We had moved forward with the reinstatement of the contract position for administrative support. And we were right in the process of bringing that position on when COVID-19, so that's been stalled. Additionally, the bylaw officer is in transition to be put in place. My understanding is that your request was specific to communications, and that certainly is something that would be looked at through the SDR. But again, any new positions we can certainly incorporate at a high level without that SDR be completed within the 2021 budget framework on what we could actually benefit from some of the staffing supports and the realignments.
I guess some of my concern, Denise, is that it sounds like you also need, beyond the communications, you need possibly other support, other staffing support as well. And that's what I'm sort of asking through that motion. Something come back to, because it seems like sometimes we ask for certain things through motions and we're not getting the results for quite a period of time due to whatever, reasons. And COVID-19, I understand, is part of the problem, but I'm just thinking there's also, you need more support.
Thank you. And we certainly appreciate that the care and the understanding of the resource challenges that we face are recognized. At the same time, I think the treasurer just outlined that without an assessment impact in 2021 and some of the other capital stresses that we are going to be facing, we're certainly very cognizant of what a staff resource costs, and we'll certainly outline that for you, and we appreciate that direction.
And I think that's probably why it makes the most sense to have that discussion within the larger budget context for next year. And I mean, if there's needs and financial room to fill those needs, then great. If not, then we may have to get more creative. Carrie, did you want to add anything? Sorry.
Just wanted to point out that the budget framework is set to come to council September 14th.
Okay. Okay. Any other discussion on that motion? Okay, all in favor? Okay, it's carried. Next notice of motion, also from Councillor Bernardo, which reads, be it resolved that staff bring to council costs and locations for a tennis court in any of the town's recreation parks by the first meeting in August.
And if I can speak to that motion, that is something we brought up quite a while ago, I guess. And we've had all kinds of estimates on what, from $10,000, I believe I heard, downwards to what the cost of putting in a cement pad or whatever for a tennis court. I'd like to get a report back, realistic. What does it cost to put a tennis court in the town, multi-use, that could be multi-use for other than just tennis. It could be used for basketball or whatever, but just what does it cost to put a tennis court into the town, into whatever park we can put it in?
Okay. Is there a seconder for that motion? Deputy Mayor Anderson. Okay. Any other discussion on that? I'm just wondering, Councillor Bernardo, again, rather than stipulating the first meeting in August, whether again we sort of tie that to budget discussions.
Sure. That's going in September as well, so yeah.
Okay.
Are you okay with that, Steve? Tying it to the budget?
Accept that as a friendly amendment. Okay. All right. All in favor? Carried. And the last of Councillor Bernardo's notices from last meeting, be it resolved that a budget of up to $15,000 from the council education and the town's marketing budgets be used to set up a budget for the racial task force.
They can't operate without a budget. They have no ability to reach out into the community. So that's why I put forward a budget so that they can operate and do the job that we're asking them to do.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that?
Before I'll second that, and I joined certainly Walter in that notice of motion that was brought, I think, at our previous full meeting. Upon reflection, and Walter and I had a discussion as to what that budget should be. I've had good and frank and open discussions with Councillor Fegan. What I'm prepared to do is make a friendly amendment to that motion and say, instead of up to 15,000, we amend that up to 12,000. That would include the money that was already earmarked for the training, and in addition, additional $6,500. And so instead of 10,000, it would be 65 in addition to what was already earmarked for the training, which I believe was about 5,500. So in total, it would be up to 12,000 instead of up to 15.
I'm good with that.
Agree with that. Okay. Okay, Councillor Fegan.
I think that's a little off, Steve. Forgive me for saying. You said 5,000 was earmarked for the training, and then an additional 6,500. My math puts us to 11,500.
No, so I think you misunderstood or probably didn't hear what I said correctly. I said it was 5,500 that was earmarked for, roughly, I believe it was 5,500 earmarked for the training. And so if you add the 65 on top of the 55, then you're up to $12,000.
Okay, understood.
Okay. So one of the reasons that we had actually presented this as a notice of motion at the last meeting was to give our treasurer some time to determine where those funds could be drawn from. Carrie, did you have a chance to look at that?
So the council conference line, the budget for that is 12,000, and we haven't utilized any of that money. And there is also 3,000 still left in the municipal grant funding section of the budget. So between the two, I had kind of tried to find 15,000. So those are the two areas.
So if that's down now to a net of 12,
then it could all come from.
That's exactly what's in the education and conference budget. That would make sense to me. Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Wagner?
Just to give a little more clarification, I think for Councillor Fegan, I think what Deputy Mayor Anderson is saying is that the 5,000 or the 5,500 earmarked for the Inclusify was 5,000 plus your HST. So that would bring you up to somewhere around the 5,500. I just, forgive me, but I just need a little bit more clarification as to what this budget would be funding, because I'm a little lost as I'm not exactly sure what the funds would be used for. If you could just maybe help clarify that for me.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. And it was mentioned at the time that this notice of motion was brought, but I'm happy to repeat it again. Part of that money, and again, it's up to that amount, so it doesn't necessarily mean that the full amount of the budget would be used. And we did discuss that whatever is being spent by the task force would be provided by way of receipts, etc., to Jennifer and to staff. And so council would certainly have a record of what's being used. But we talked about things, for example, paid advertising. So whether that's in the Shelburne Free Press, and the idea is to run paid advertising for an extended period of time, whether it's a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, because you want to be able to get that information before the community so that they are able to see it, and so that we're able to get maximum response. Because if we're not getting maximum response, then the whole exercise is a waste of time. So there's, for example, the Shelburne Free Press, there is paid advertising on Facebook or IG, depending on the target group that you're looking at. One of the items that I discussed with Carol today, and maybe we get some confirmation with staff, is, for example, submitting some information with our water bills, for example, and the cost that may be associated with that by adding a flyer as it pertains to, let's say, the survey component of what we're trying to accomplish, or sending that information on its own, for example, to our residents. So the idea is to get maximum impact. So that's, so I guess, sort of similar to what we did with the dog tags, right? And getting that information before the members of our community. So it's paid advertising, as I said, with those different avenues that can certainly run a cost. Will it actually amount to that full amount? I'm hoping that it won't, certainly, but Wade and I are certainly sitting on the task force, and we will ensure that every dollar is being spent prudently, as I assured Councillor Kyle Fegan. And I think if there is an opportunity or a need to re-engage the trainer for whatever reason, there is an opportunity to potentially do that as well. So that 65 would encompass all of that. And again, it's up to that amount. So if all of what I discussed, it doesn't amount to that amount of money, then it won't be spent.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Fegan?
This question is actually for Carrie. My understanding is the town has accounts with Country 105, with the Free Press, and those sort of media outlets already. Could we take some of the funding for the town's budget for advertising through those avenues? Could we dedicate some of that funding towards this initiative as well?
There is a budget for advertising in the local newspapers available. Something else that you could do too is bulk mailing through Canada Post, because that would reach all the residents in town, including tenants. Because right now, if you include it with the water billing, those are only mailed to the owners of the property, and some of the owners are out of town resident or out of town owners. So in order to reach the tenants, the best way is a bulk mailing within town, and that is at a reduced rate. I don't know the amount off the top of my head, but we can find that out for you. And then as far as the radio, we do have an agreement with them for a certain amount of radio time per year, and Carol Maitland looks after that for us with respect to whatever we're advertising at the time. So if we go over and above whatever our arrangement is with them, then there would be a cost for that. But we can certainly look into that as well.
Okay.
Thanks, Carrie.
Any other discussion? Okay, I'll call the
Just
question.
maybe as a part of that, Wade, I know you're eager to wrap this up, and so am I, believe me.
Getting under the water.
Yeah, my throat is parched right now. As a part of the discussion, and maybe this is actually after we finalize the motion, it's regarding, because it was around this motion that I had mentioned this at the last meeting as well, is getting assistance from Carol Maitland when it comes to the marketing component and the survey, et cetera. So I just want to confirm that we're able to lean on her to help facilitate the work that is required, especially as she's utilizing the connections and the relationships that she has when it comes to the marketing.
Denise?
Through the mayor, certainly anything that's core to staff positions, responsibilities can certainly be something that we do. So posting surveys, whether we use Beyond the Gate, Bang the Table, or our Facebook, certainly. It's just Carol doesn't, as long as she's not writing things that she doesn't have subject matter expertise in, but certainly we can support anything with all our social media platforms. Bang the Table is a survey component if you don't want to use SurveyMonkey, and sharing information with any medium that we have, we're happy to do that.
And I appreciate that very much. And certainly I wouldn't be asking Carol to do work outside of her expertise, but whatever she feels comfortable doing and can provide assistance, we would greatly appreciate it. So thank you very much.
And we're happy to share the information with our network. So if it's another organization's link that they can piggyback on ours, that's also a benefit in terms of reaching profile.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Call the question. All in favor? Carried. Okay. And the last notice of motion from last meeting, moved by Councillor Wagner, be it resolved that the town of Shelburne would like to acknowledge the dedication and personal sacrifice of our essential workers who have provided to our community to ensure during our challenging COVID-19 times we remain safe and furthermore declare March 17th in the town of Shelburne as Essential Workers Day. A seconder for that motion? Councillor Bernardo. Councillor Wagner, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. Pretty much it kind of speaks for itself, is I guess sort of how I tried to write it. But it's just honoring those that, put forth the support for the rest of us, and at the same time potentially put their lives and their family at risk in order to facilitate the rest of us. So I just wanted to acknowledge them.
Okay. Councillor Bernardo, do you want to add anything as seconder?
I agree totally with Lindsay. It's very important that we acknowledge those that have worked. I know I have a family member that worked at Dufferin Oaks and put in a lot of double shifts and time away from her family to take care of the elderly there. They should be acknowledged for what they've done and what they put themselves forward for.
Any additional comments? All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. All right, next is the matter that I asked to be put on the agenda tonight. And I don't want to belabor it too much, but I just thought we should have a brief discussion regarding the procedural bylaw sections as they relate to notices of motion. So the clerk has included as an excerpt in the agenda package the relevant sections to that. So essentially, I think as most of us know, any member intending to bring a motion forward must provide notice of that motion at the immediate preceding meeting. It indicates in the procedural bylaw that the notice of motion is to provide at the very least a brief description of the matter to be considered. Typically what we've been doing, and I think is probably more helpful for council members and staff, is to actually provide the language of the motion itself as opposed to just sort of a general description of it. But it does provide for that if something comes up during a meeting and you basically just want to say, look, I'm providing notice of the motion at the next meeting to discuss ABC, that the formal wording of that motion can be crafted at a later date prior to the meeting on which the motion will be considered. Typically what happens is, as is the design, those notices of motion will then be considered at the following meeting. However, subsection D of section 30.2 does provide a provision for the chair, which is myself or whoever else happens to be presiding over the meeting in my absence, at the chair's discretion, to move forward and consider the notice of motion immediately at that meeting, provided that there is unanimous consent of all council members in attendance. So I don't know if Jennifer, if you'd like to add anything in addition to that. Hopefully that clarifies some of the matters for council members.
Just to note that council does have the decision and can request that the procedural bylaw be amended. However, if certain sections were to be removed, there still is the opportunity that you suspend the procedural bylaw and move forward with that. So,
yeah, which in my mind, I think is perhaps a riskier proposition than having to seek unanimous consent to consider a motion immediately. A full suspension of the procedural bylaw, essentially would throw all of the rule book out the window for a time being, as opposed to just, on unanimous consent saying, look, there's some urgency involved. We'll deal with this matter tonight, as opposed to waiting for the following meeting. Councillor Bernardo.
Your Worship, is there any possibility we can look at the procedural bylaw and as the get your title in full, clerk, as Jennifer has mentioned, there are some parts of it that I'd like to revisit. And I guess I might as well put it forward, this inability of putting anything on the agenda other than 2 weeks prior. It's a long time. Things do come up within that 2 week time frame that maybe should go on the agenda, but we're unable to put them on the agenda other than notice of motions or ask for a suspension of the procedural bylaw. So I'm wondering if we can shorten that down a little bit. I'm not saying that, you know, walk the motion on the night of the meeting, but 2 weeks is a very long time. So I'm just wondering if we can look at the procedural bylaw and see if there are some places we can tweak it a little bit.
Yeah, so we did some amendments right at the beginning of this term. But yeah, I mean, as we're sort of approaching midterm, you know, it may be kind of a natural point to take another look at it and see if there's additional areas. My suggestion would be perhaps on a night where we're not quite as overburdened as tonight, we maybe just put that on as a general discussion item. And in advance of that, if everybody could kind of, you know, take some time to review the current iteration of the procedural bylaw and come prepared that night to discuss any potential changes that you may want to see. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that.
Okay. So yeah, I'm not sure when that will be, when we'll sort of have a lighter agenda, but Jennifer, if you could maybe just sort of keep that in the back of your mind, and one night when we're not so heavy, we can maybe include that. Okay. Oh, sorry, Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one quick question for staff. As we talk about packed agendas moving forward, could you maybe advise as to when potentially we could do the training for staff and for council with respect to the anti-racism? I know we had talked about that, but that has been approved by council already, but we hadn't discussed potential dates as to when that could occur. So I'm wondering if we get some feedback as a group as to when potentially that could be added to the agenda.
Would it be best for everybody? I mean, I think probably the answer is yes, to do it outside of a regularly scheduled council meeting, and you know, not unlike the way we dealt with the strategic planning sessions. What's that program called? Doodle Calendar or whatever, where you send out a few possible dates and everybody can vote on it. Okay, and then we can maybe pick a day and time that works for everybody. Okay, good. Anything else on the procedural bylaw? Does anybody have any questions before we move on from that? No. Okay. It is 10:03 according to my clock, so I guess we will need a verbal motion to sit past 10, keeping in mind that we are nearing the end. By Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Bernardo. All in favor? Begrudgingly carried. All right. So that takes us to notices of motion for this evening. I know that Councillor Fegan has one. So Councillor Fegan, if you want to read that notice of motion into the record, and this will be considered on the July 27th meeting.
27th, yeah. Don't want to belabor it, so I'll just read the motion and then we can deal with it next meeting if that's okay with everybody. So it reads as, whereas bylaw number 56, 2007 dictates our accountability and transparency policy, and the policy statement encourages public access and participation to ensure that decision-making is responsive to the needs of its constituents and receptive to their opinions. And that regarding the appointment of the members of the Anti-Racism Task Force missed some aspects of our community of marginalized individuals. Be it therefore resolved that in being sensitive to the timeframes needed, Council appoint up to a further 3 seats on the task force. Council is to bring forward names of up to 3 more individuals at the next scheduled council meeting, July 27th to 2020, where council will review the names and further applicants and select up to 3 more individuals to be appointed to said task force. And that, as per our policies, the term for said task force be set for review and reapplication to coincide with the current term of the current council.
Thank you. Any other notices of motion for this evening? No, okay. All right, so that takes us to communications. There are 10 items listed there under communication. Is there anything that anybody would like to deal with exclusively? No, if not, look for a mover and seconder to receive those items under 8.0 communication for information. Councillor Hall, second by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? Carried. All right. No closed session. So look for a mover and seconder for the confirming bylaw. Be it resolved that leave be given for the reading and enacting of bylaw number 31-2020, being a bylaw to confirm certain proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Shelburne for its regular council meeting held July 13th, 2020. Councillor Bernardo, moved by seconded by Councillor Hall. All in favor? It's carried. And finally, motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Fegan, and everybody else. All in favor? Carried. All righty. Thank you all. A bit of a marathon session, but we made it. So, yeah, so just keep in mind, special meeting Wednesday night at 8:30. All right. Take care.